Paul Metzger, and he is going to be leading a track in the global theology of culture. And he's a professor here at the school, and he's also the director of New Wine, New Wineskins. And basically, I'm going to turn this all over to Paul. I'll be asking questions. You'll see Paul, and I'll also be controlling the documents. So I'll be turning my webcam off, and we'll go from there. Paul, why don't you take over from here?
Thanks so much, Derek, and it's great to be with all of you this morning. And I'll look forward to receiving some of your questions as we proceed and comments as well. So this is the Global Theology of Culture track that we're developing as part of the Doctorate of Ministry program at Multnomah Biblical Seminary. And really it's dealing with the subject of how do you come into contact with and minister with those who are in settings, whether here or abroad, that require very intentional servant leadership skills as it relates to vulnerable communities, multi-ethnic communities, resilient communities, though often communities under duress would be a part of this program. And I'd like to unpack it by way of a few stories of where we've been involved with this kind of approach to ministry regionally, and also where we hope to go globally. The first one would be our work at New Wine, New Wineskins in San Francisco. We've been invited into the San Francisco Bay Area to partner with leaders there who are concerned over matters of gang violence. So we're dealing with matters of justice and injustice, but we're waiting for that invitation rather than inviting ourselves into the community. And that's what we see as key to any kind of missional engagement, to be invited in rather than inviting ourselves, dealing with such issues as gang violence and the fatherlessness that's bound up with it. So we've been invited in by ethnic leaders. They're the ones who are leading the charge, and we're there in support role. And we think that's so key for global theology of culture, being invited in, coming in support role rather than dominating the agenda, listening rather than always speaking. I'm doing all the speaking right now, but hopefully there'll be opportunity to engage with your questions and comments as we proceed. But it's being invited in, coming alongside the leaders there. They're the experts. We're coming in to support them. Whatever resources we have, they're more collaborative and part of a larger reality. Vulnerable issues, vulnerable communities, but resilient leaders who are asking us to participate given what New Wine brings to the table in terms of our theology of culture. And I'll unpack that more as we proceed. But so we go in, we're invited in, we come alongside, we listen. We're always coming to be in a supportive role rather than the dictating role or the dominant role. And we think that's important when we're dealing with inner city communities, multi-ethnic communities, and global communities. You'll be able to see a blog post that I've developed in part for this webinar this morning, a couple of blog posts over the next few days. The first one is titled Coney 2012, 2013 and Beyond. And there I'm dealing with the work of Invisible Children as it's seeking to draw attention to and make famous or infamous this internationally wanted criminal, Joseph Kony, and his work with the Lord's Resistance Army. It's been in the news. You may have watched this video. It's about a half hour long. And while I appreciate very much the efforts of Invisible Children, I appreciate the attention they're bringing to this and how they're mobilizing young people to engage, I'm also concerned, as are others, as to some of the posture and some of the dynamics as it relates to communities in contexts overseas. In particular, I have in mind what a Ugandan blogger has written or has actually shared in her own video responding to the movement, where she says, so often Americans in the West, They come in as the Messiah figures and dictate to us the terms of engagement. Americans in the West generally need to come in a posture of participation, of collaboration. Westerners need to come in and listen and allow us to share our stories rather than trying to tell the story for us. And also the matter of really coming in such a way that they support local initiatives rather than try and frame things from outside. So that posture, that approach, that listening ear, supportive role, orientation is what's really bound up with the DNA of this global theology of culture track, whether it's in the Bay Area or Portland or in Uganda, wherever it might be. It's these kinds of values, coming alongside, listening, working in collaboration, bringing our resources, but sensing and thinking through what are the resources that the people there already have, and to come again, as I say, in a supportive role. That is key to this relational and incarnational global theology of culture track that New Wine, New Wineskins puts in place. Derek has referred to it in other ways, and I'll let him speak to that issue as we proceed. But I could, if it's okay with you, go into matters of what are the courses in this program, and also what are the personal incomes, or outcomes rather, not incomes, but outcomes that those who are part of the track would see embodied in themselves and hopefully in me as well as we proceed together. So if that's okay with you, I will proceed with what the courses are in this Global Theology of Culture track, and then what are the outcomes for the program as it relates to our own personal development as leaders. So Derek, if you could put that forth in terms of what we're about, global thinking, global practice, global age, what are those courses, that would be great. So Derek is putting that up here now. So the courses that we'll have for this program will include the following. Again, it's a Doctorate of Ministry course or program track in Global Theology of Culture, Global Thinking, Global Practice, Global Age. There'll be a course geared towards spiritual formation. And the kind of formation that's really needed here is bound up with what I sense is so true of our Lord Jesus, his vulnerable love. I see this in John chapter 13, where Jesus is washing the feet of his disciples. The last word of commentary has not been written on that particular passage. The kind of security in the Father's embrace that Jesus has, that as his hour of glory of the cross and resurrection comes, he shows his disciples, John 13 says, the full extent of his love. He takes off his outer garments, takes up the bowl of water, the towel, and sets about to wash his disciples' feet. That kind of vulnerability, that kind of transparency, that kind of strength and weakness is what's needed spiritually, formation-wise, for this kind of track. For myself as a white Christian leader, it's often hard for me to come in as a listener. It's often hard for me to come in a support role, to create space for others to shine who are not part of my group, not part of my ethnicity, not part of my subculture, but to come into that role of vulnerable love. The kind of spiritual formation that's needed for this track is all centered in what we see of Christ in John chapter 13. So there'll be a whole course early on the kind of spiritual formation that is required to lead by way of global thinking, global practice, global age. There'll be a course on biblical cultural literacy. One of the things that I encourage people and hope to see modeled in my own life and practice is not starting out with having all the answers, but learning how to ask the questions. So when you go into a community that may be under duress, or a very diverse community, and we come in as leaders, one of the things we need to do is to ask the people, what do you think needs to be done here? Instead of already having in place, coming in from thousands of miles away or from across town, already having in mind what we think needs to be done, and we predetermine the agenda, the strategies, and the like. And so the cultural literacy, the biblical cultural literacy, moving from that vulnerability in Christ's love, is to step into people's shoes, step into their culture, move into their neighborhood, so to speak, and learn their language. Listen to how they're framing things. As that Ugandan blogger said over Kony 2012, let us share our story. Don't try and share our story for us. Allow us to share our story. And so literacy here involves listening to the people. It seems so obvious in one sense, but it's not so obvious. There's this famous text by the Brazilian thinker called Pedagogy of the Oppressed, where he says the people, the nameless people, the people whom we take to be nobodies, often have so much to offer us, and we come in as the experts and try and teach them and name their universe. We need to allow them to name their universe. And so the kind of pedagogy that's involved here, the kind of literacy, is learning to ask of them what they think needs to be done, listening to their story. That is so key. The people there are often more experts than we give them credit for, and we need to come into that place of becoming literate ourselves and to put forth a literacy program where we ourselves are becoming literate. And I think you can see how that flows from the kind of vulnerable love, spiritual formation, because if I'm not secure in Christ's love, I'm not going to allow for others to shape me. I'm going to have to dictate the terms because that's how I find my identity. This will lead to a more healthy form of unity because instead of there being majority culture, minority culture, and the like, we all sense our need for one another. And that's a collaborative spirit where we're all learning to draw from one another's rich cultural perspectives and what the Lord is teaching us through our distinctive cultural stories, practices, rituals, and the like. So the biblical unity that's envisioned here is really a unity that is multifaceted, multidimensional, and it really is this mosaic of God's glory that we see represented in the Bible in such places as the book of Revelation, various chapters in Revelation, and Jesus calls for it in John 17. May they be one as we are one, to let the world know that you sent your Son. That requires an egalitarian orientation, and I'm talking here egalitarian in terms of how we as brothers and sisters in Christ engage one another, diverse ethnicities, that we're really drawing from one another. We're really contributing to one another. We have table fellowship with one another, and we all bring something to share at the meal. That's the kind of biblical unity that we're talking about here. And I'm encouraged and excited about this tract as a whole, and also knowing that Michael Emerson of Divided by Faith has already agreed to be one of the guest lecturers in this track. He's very excited about it, and as I said before, he co-authored the book Divided by Faith, dealing with the black-white problem in the evangelical church in North America. I could see him speaking directly to this matter of biblical unity and what's needed to get beyond our racial divides. So that's another course that will be in the program. Also, biblical witness. This is another key part of the course. How do we engage in witness, evangelistically, apologetically, and the like? I often quote Floyd McClung, who was then quoted by Joe Ulrich, former president of Multnomah, where Floyd McClung, who worked with YWAM in the red light district in Amsterdam, he said, "People do not care how much you know until they know how much you care." The kind of biblical witness that's required here, and it fits with everything else we're talking about with global thinking, global practice, global age, it's earning the right to be heard. And people really need to know that we are really committed to them relationally before they're going to open up their hearts and lives to us. We need to engage in rational argumentation, holistic argumentation, but that's relationally framed, where people are secured in relationship with us so that they will open their hearts to us. I have a book coming out with Thomas Nelson. It'll be released in May. It's called Connecting Christ, How to Discuss Jesus in a World of Diverse Paths. I have religious leaders of various stripes and people of other traditions, whether it's Mormonism, Unitarian Universalism, Buddhism, Hinduism, atheism, Judaism, Islam, engaging. And I'm trying to put in place this approach, a biblical witness, that the verdict that Jesus is Lord demands evidence in our lives that he is Lord, and creating the space and earning the right to be heard. And often earning the right to be heard is by dying to our right to be heard. Because so often earning the right to be heard can be seen as a sales pitch, but we have to really be willing to die to our right to be heard. And that goes all the way back to spiritual formation. If I'm not secure in the Father's embrace through Christ and the Spirit, how am I ever going to learn from others? How am I ever going to be about unity that's multifaceted in a way that requires collaboration if I'm not secure in that embrace? And the kind of witness that requires dying to my right to be heard, creating the space with my own relational life that's being poured out through Christ's love. Only when that happens will I think we engage people in such a way, even hostile audiences, as I've experienced in my own life, where I'm willing to take the hit so as to win their hearts, but that's going to cost me something. That's the kind of witness and more along those lines that will be required in this age, this global age. It's often very disillusioned with Christianity and the church, and how we as the church need to engage in very incarnational terms that cause our own death to ourselves in increasing measure. And this is bound up with justice. So often justice requires our own death. And so often I think injustices are fostered in our world by well-meaning people, not like myself, but often being insensitive to the communities themselves. And we come in with great agendas, great intentionality to help, but we're not listening. We're not willing to come in a supportive role. And so we put in place structures that actually cause more harm than good. And so the biblical justice we're talking about is justice that requires a holistic response of relationship, not trying to go in and fix problems, but to build relationships in such a way that the problems themselves are approached relationally. And I feel that even with the gang violence issues, if we had more communal dynamics in Portland and San Francisco and elsewhere, where we affirmed ethnic leaders in churches and the like, and we supported missional enterprises where we're all coming together, bringing our resources together, and affirming fathers in the churches, mothers in our churches, fathers and mothers in our communities, we could deal much better with some of the violence that's occurring in these communities as we engage much more relationally. But we're going to deal with issues in this track by way of the slave trade, the sex trade, globalization, not only the strengths of it, but also the weaknesses of it in terms of how it often is westernization forced upon very resilient though vulnerable communities here and abroad. So justice that's truly holistic and relationally framed will be a key part of this. And then the capstone course will be drawing all these things together, and it will move us toward the DMin ministry thesis that would be bound up with each of you in terms of your long-term ministry goals. So if you're a part of this track, you would share, I believe, these values. That's why you would join this track. And the job for us here at Multnomah would be to partner with you, listening well to you, supporting you as ministry leaders and experts in your own sphere. You're already leaders, and our job is to support you and to help you craft a thesis that will actually hone your own abilities, your own instincts, your own expertise all the more, so that you can all the more do the great work you're doing in your own fields of ministry. My hope would be that it would lead toward publication venues for you. In my own work over the years with publication, I've learned hopefully a few things on how to craft an argument well, and it's our job to help you, as you're helping us grow, collaboratively. Our job is to help you hone those skills academically and the like to support the kingdom calling you have before the Lord in terms of this global thinking, global practice, global age. So those are the courses, and it moves you toward the thesis project that you have as really a major outflow of this that I would hope would lead toward publication ventures for you in promoting this, because we're going to be part of I hate to use the word fraternity most of the time, but I'll use it here, part of a fraternity or a community, sorority, whatever you want to call it, where we're part of this tribe together, this group together. We're colleagues going forward together, so we see ourselves as part of a family with these shared values. I'd like to come now to the personal outcomes that I would see for the leaders in this track, and these are matters that I'm seeking to grow in myself. The goal here would be to articulate a theology of cultural engagement, and with it evangelism and apologetics, that is relationally and incarnationally framed through recourse to Scripture, grounded in the triune God, and with consideration of our historical and contemporary context. When we talk about this in this track, we're talking about, again, grounded in the life of the triune God. God is a communion of divine persons. If you've worked with me before, you've heard me share along these lines. To put it in succinct, simple terms, God is not an eggshell, egg white, egg yolk. God is three persons in relation. An egg yolk does not share life with an eggshell. The Father shares life with the Son and the Spirit, and we are invited into the life of this triune God. And it's from that life, of that communion with this triune God, that we are poured out into the world as the Spirit of love is poured out into our hearts. As the Christ who dies to himself so that we might live is poured out through the Spirit into our lives and into the church as a community, we are poured out into the world. And it's that kind of relational, incarnational theology where we're not simply earning the right. The way we earn the right is by dying to our rights, just as our Lord laid down his divine rights to win us to himself. That costs us something. It costs us of our lives, and the world desperately needs leaders, needs the church, needs us to be willing to count that cost as Jesus himself counted it, not settling for so little, but calling us to something so much more, that is communion with one another before him and in him, in a world that's desperately dying to know him. And bound up with this, in the historical and contemporary global context, is again approaching spiritual formation by way of Christ's love communally. So back to those courses. We had a course on this. My hope is that we will become more and more of those leaders as we encourage one another and affirm one another to die to ourselves. We will more and more be secure in this kind of love, and only this kind of love. Also, it would be a matter of pursuing spiritual leadership formation collaboratively and vulnerably rather than unilaterally. So this collaborative orientation, you heard me talk about that in terms of what this track entails. And we'll come to that even in terms of conflict resolution, collaborative conflict resolution. But as we're forming leaders and as we're being formed ourselves, we're working collaboratively, not unilaterally. Developing communication skills that are dialogical in orientation, not treating the people we're serving as blank slates, but seeing that they are already people with profound resources, profound callings, profound skill sets that often the dominant culture, the Western culture, fails to see because we're so often not listening. We have our own resources, often money, technology, and like, and they have their place, but we're often failing to listen. We're not dialoguing, we're actually speaking in monologue terms, and it's developing communication skills that are dialogical. Seeking conflict resolution that's transformational. The best kind of conflict resolution is not win at all costs, it's not passive aggressive, it's not retreat, it's not compromise, it's collaboration where we seek to work in an open environment, moving forward with open hearts, open lives, learning how to ask questions that are more open so that hopefully, when all is said and done, everyone wins, that everyone owns the pond together, and it's not one group over another, but we're all working together toward the shared same goals. And that's what's needed in our global context, not westernization, but globalization that's truly communal, collaborative, dialogical, etc. The last one, or the last one here is engaging mission communally and holistically with consideration of applied justice concerns. I oversaw a panel at the Justice Conference that was here in Portland a couple of weeks ago, And even there, I was having to die to myself, and it's not easy for me to do as a white Christian leader. Maybe you have less of a trouble with this, but my job was to really create an environment and to put forth a platform where those of diverse ethnicities with their great instincts, skill sets, expertise could shine. And it was to set it up so that they could lead and I get out of the way. And they were speaking to the issues of gentrification here in Portland. And we had Dr. John Perkins, Dr. Leroy Haynes, and others speaking to that, people of diverse ethnicities speaking to these issues. And my friend and colleague Randy Woodley, Dr. Randy Woodley at George Fox, was saying to the white community, we don't need your expertise, we don't need your education, what we want is your hearts. And that's what this is about. And we all have something to contribute, we all have something to bring to the potluck. But it's a matter of all sharing in life together. And they were addressing the matters of gentrification in Portland, and it's a big, complex, difficult issue. It has some positive aspects to it, namely communal renewal, community renewal. But often what happens is that communities, though resilient, but with less economic wherewithal, are displaced, forced out, and it creates great disparities economically, ethnically, and in many other ways. And this justice panel was engaging with a holistic approach to justice at the Justice Conference. And so seeing that, you know, all these matters, even of gentrification, which is about communal renewal or neighborhood renewal, it has its pluses, but it often has its minuses, because when communities are renewed, economically the price goes up. And those communities that were there before often get displaced. In Portland and Oregon, I'm just trying to illustrate this, we don't realize that one of the reasons why Portland and Oregon is so white is because of the history, the law books, the structures were put in place, urban renewal, Negro removal. And I've written about this, and I can draw your attention to some blog posts I've written on the subject to just get at some of these things. And so applied justice concerns that are communal and holistic requires coming together as a community with everything we've already been talking about, and seeing that any justice issue requires a whole complex of issues for us to engage rightly. We have to deal with those laws that are on the books. We need to get at some of those laws that are not laws on the books, but they're laws in our hearts, these preferences, these privileges, these forms of entitlement that need to be repented of. And some of the consumeristic impulses that we have in our communities that cause us as churches not to get involved because it's not sexy in places like Portlandia. It's not going to help our tribe increase. And God wants us to repent so we can be about justice that's truly communal, holistic, and it's engaging communities from a variety of vantage points. So those are some of the personal outcomes as we deal with justice and injustice in our very racialized, genderized, dehumanized global context today. And that's one of the greatest burdens I have. You know, people are talking more and more about relationship, and in our world today, it's harder and harder to find community and relationship. Henry Nouwen said, true community is the place where the person you least like always lives. What we see in the movie Crash is that people don't live together. We don't live with those who are different from us. Instead, we're fragmented and we objectify others. We commodify others. And that's the big problem in our global society today. Everything is framed by way of economic structures that commodify people rather than bring people into thriving, vibrant communities that require collaboration, vulnerable love, and the other values that I've been talking about with you this morning. So that's the gist of this program. Hopefully you can sense my own passion for it, and I'm really hoping that you'll join me and us here at Multnomah Biblical Seminary and University to enter more fully into these values that I believe come right from the heart of Jesus and call me to die to myself. Will you die with me?
Well, Paul, I wish you could get a little more excited about this. Before we go on, we'll take some questions, but something I'm curious about that maybe others might want to know is what's your connection to the people that you'll be bringing to the program, the guest presenters, some of the adjuncts? I mean, how do you know these people, and why would they be coming? I mean, what's that about? Could you explain that a little bit, please?
Well, I'll just speak to the person I've already alluded to in terms of his own willingness to engage. I'll just start out there. Dr. Michael Emerson, co-author of Divided by Faith, professor of sociology at Rice University, is someone I've greatly appreciated not only for his scholarship, but also for his life. He models what we're talking about here as he's part of a diverse multi-ethnic church. I sense in him such a humble spirit. I just appreciate him so much. We've had opportunity to interact with one another. He's done a couple of endorsements for a couple of book projects that I've written. And so we've been able to engage one another in terms of values. I've drawn from his work, Divided by Faith, the one he wrote with Christian Smith. I drew from that in some key ways for the book I did, Consuming Jesus Beyond Race and Class Divisions in a Consumer Church. So many of the speakers that will be a part of this program will be people I've already known, I've worked with in a variety of contexts. And so that's all I can say now to particular individuals. There will be people who share these values, people I've worked with in various capacities, various contexts in the recent past or over many years. It'll be a diverse group, people of diverse ethnicities, diverse backgrounds, because this program requires not a monolithic approach, but a very diverse, multi-ethnic, multi-perspectival approach, because that's what's needed in our global context.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, why don't we just start taking some questions? Here's our first one. It's who have you learned from, and people you've read and heard and listened to, and how might this influence this learning program?
The first person who comes to my mind is Dr. John M. Perkins. He's a mentor to me. He's a ministry partner. He had asked me several years ago to partner with him in ministry, and I could think of no greater compliment in my life than to be asked by Dr. Perkins to be not only his friend but his ministry partner when he's someone who has so shaped my thinking, he being a practitioner with profound kingdom values. I often share about it, and I'll have to make it quick this morning, but I've written about it in various contexts. When he shared at Reed College several years ago through New Wine, New Wineskins, when we asked him to come to Portland to speak on justice, and he spoke at Reed College and he shared his testimony. Here I was, a Multnomah Biblical Seminary prof, and if he had given an altar call that evening at Reed, I would have gone forward for the altar call, because it broke through to me. It's not simply his framework of relocation, reconciliation, and redistribution. It's how God has broken him through the crucible of God's grace and love. And I still see that shaping him as an 80-some-year-old man. I was with him a couple weeks ago, and we're working on a book together on holistic gospel witness. And I just was so moved, because it's, again, this vulnerable love. It's this upside-down kingdom that we see modeled in Jesus. And theologians that have influenced me, who resonate, I believe, in terms of their writings with what Dr. Perkins is about, would be Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I've dedicated in part this book with Thomas Nelson to Dietrich Bonhoeffer, because he said we need to move beyond this God of the gaps thinking. We're always trying to find a place of relevance for God when science and our culture at large is taking away our places of significance in the church. And he says, you know, the only God who is with us is the God-forsaken God in the gallows. We need to go with Jesus and die so we might truly live. And that has so shaped my thinking. It comes forth in this Connecting Christ book, a book I'm working on for InterVarsity on Trinitarian social ethics, will be about this uncommon God we see as Jesus Christ, engaging the common good, not simply, as I said before, earning the right to be heard, but dying to our rights to be heard. And I see that in Perkins. I see it in Bonhoeffer. Colin Gunton, my doctoral mentor at King's College London, spoke and wrote along these Trinitarian lines in so many ways. Karl Barth, whose work I reflected upon. I look forward to getting to know more of the work of Archbishop Romero, who was assassinated there in El Salvador for his siding with the oppressed indigenous population at the hands of the aristocracy and the militaristic regime. These are figures whom I want to see haunt me more. And people who are profound people who no one knows about, but who have shaped me, even my wife, Mariko. She's one of the greatest influences on my life. Japanese national, Japanese citizen. Our kids are dual citizens, and having to experience life through their eyes has really shaped me a lot. Her being screamed at the immigration office in Chicago and elsewhere. I've written about this. It continues to break through to me. And just what she shared recently, and she loves white people like me. She's not against white people like me. But it haunts me what she said, and I tried to model it at the Justice Conference with my panel. She says, I'm longing for the day when white Christian leaders such as yourself, Paul, sit down, listen more, hand the microphone over to those of other persuasions and listen. And I need to practice that as I engage the Buddhists, the Hindus, the Mormons, and others. I see that my good friend John Moorhead is with us today, and I've learned from John on these values, and I'm hoping John will be connecting with us in this program, in this track, as will all of you. And I find that as I listen to others, and I really listen, not bait and switch, but really listen, not giving food to people, not giving opportunities to listen so that others can share, but really wanting to listen and learn, then they'll want to listen and learn too from me. But it's how to do so communally. And my wife, through living life with her, it's really shaped me as well as John Perkins, and my kids as well, Christopher and Julianne. They've shaped me because as Japanese and American citizens, seeing life as non-white people, trying to figure out what they look like and how they're to live in this society today, it causes me to think anew about how to die to my own entitlements and privileges. And so this kind of theology that's liberating beyond liberation theology and beyond a theology that's not liberating at all. And so often I find that fundamentalist evangelical theology, with all its critiques of liberation theology, is death theology. We need to be more liberating and affirm the good in those who have sought to engage those in economic and ethnic duress, but to come alongside toward a more holistic and liberating theology rooted in the scriptures, rooted in the triune God, a God who gives himself fully to us, and yet who does not lose himself in the process. That's the God we have to bank on and go forward on. And so those are some of the influences in my life.
Okay, thanks, Mark. You also asked another question. How will this program depart from other traditional doctor of ministry programs? What's different and also what's the same? I'll address that. I'll tackle that. We are taking a cohort approach, meaning that people will be taking, participants in this particular track will be all taking the same classes together. They'll be attending classes together. They'll have the opportunity to interact together between classes. One of the things that we are doing and encouraging is that there will be active seat time where people come to a class and interact with Paul and guest instructors. But then in between classes, in between times courses meet, they will also interact via online forum. So they'll have the opportunity to discuss what they're learning, to do it in a guided fashion, to be able to learn from one another. Also along those lines is that the cohorts, each cohort or each track will be following a curriculum or a set of classes that are going to be set by the faculty mentors. So people will be spending the bulk of their time learning from the faculty mentors. We don't have a lot of extra classes. We have one course which will deal with research and putting the dissertation / the final project together. It'll deal with writing, but that's the only in common course that students will be taking, the bulk of their work will be devoted really to the specific track they're in. In fact, I think we probably have, for our course, the bulk of what we offer. In fact, it's 30 units, 32 credit hours out of, 30 credit hours out of 32 credit hours are dealing specifically with the course that your faculty mentor has outlined. 6 of those units will be devoted to your final project and dissertation, but again, that's being done under guided instruction with your primary reader as well as with the faculty mentor. One of the things that I think is unique, that I think is also significant, is that the guest instructors, the adjunct faculty that come, they all have personal relationships with the faculty mentor. So what we see is the opportunity for participants in each track, in each cohort, to actually participate in an existing relationship. They'll be coming alongside people who already know one another, people who are doing ministry perhaps independently or maybe together, but they're already in conversation. They know what the other is doing, and that you'll be sort of like a fly on the wall, if you will, listening in on an existing conversation. But not only that, you don't just listen in, you get to participate. And so I really see this as a unique opportunity to really be joining with what other people are already doing, and you're becoming part of that because you yourself have been called to do ministry. God's wired you uniquely, and you have something to bring to the table. And so you'll be joining existing relationships. Something that also we're doing is the dissertation or the final project is going to be very deliberate. We're in the process of outlining what that's all going to look like. As Paul alluded to earlier, what we do want to do is encourage people to publish. When you're finished, we think that you'll be able to have a product that can be published, and we see that as an opportunity to actually expand your ministry reach. God has called you to a particular ministry, a particular setting, and we believe that that can be expanded certainly through publication, through opportunities to engage people maybe at conferences or in workshops, or to really increase the size of your ministry. It's not simply the people that you're coming into contact with on a regular basis in your own local ministry, but you can do that by publishing, by webinars, by workshops, conferences. So we want to really encourage that. And then lastly, I'd say a different approach that we're taking that I haven't seen anyplace else is we want to encourage people to maybe even consider doing a collaborative dissertation. One of the things I'd observe is that the doctorate of ministry programs, when you get to the dissertation phase, it looks extraordinarily a lot like what people do for a PhD. No surprises there because people who put the DMin program together had PhDs, and they wanted to create, I guess, a professional doctorate program. Well, what I think we can emphasize more of is the practical application and the collaborative nature of ministry. And so there's already existing examples of dissertations that are collaborative, final projects that are collaborative, and it's just an issue of bringing this into our program. And what we would see is the opportunity for people to work together with their final project, their dissertation, and produce a product that is a standalone piece, but is also done in relationship with other people. I can get into the various, I guess, details of it at a later point in time. If you're really interested, you can contact me personally, but that's just a general overview. So hopefully, Mark, that answers your question. If there's any others, feel free. Ooh, okay. How can we best pray for and support the DMin plans at this stage? That is a great question, Jeff. Thank you. Be praying for the process of getting approval from ATS. we just recently heard from them, and they are requesting a little more information. It caused us to have to push our plans back about 6 months, but certainly making sure that we've got our ducks in a row, that they would approve what we're proposing. That would be great. Certainly lining things up with regards to adjunct instructors for the faculty mentors. Currently we have Rick McKinley and also Paul, where they're scheduled to lead the first couple of tracks that we plan to open with. And I think making sure that they're able to line up their adjunct instructors is going to be a key thing. But thank you for asking. I appreciate that. Anything else that we can answer this morning? Feel free to just type in via chat. Paul, is there anything you wanted to add while they're typing away?
I'm listening now, Derek.
Okay.
Trying to model the program.
Good.
Do you have some comments or questions, Derek, that you'd like to add here?
Yeah, I think I'd be interested in knowing what would keep you from joining Paul's track.
That's a great question. They'd have to answer that, I believe. And while we're waiting for them, I believe you'll be making available these blog posts that I've developed that relate to some of the themes I've been discussing this morning. One that'll be appearing on the Christian Post sometime today, Coney 2012, 2013 and beyond is one of them. And so I'd encourage people to look at that because it really does reflect the program track here for Global Theology of Culture.
Yeah. Okay, we have a question. How long will it be until we can get an outline of the major and the classes for the program? We already have that. I can send that to you individually. We have, let me share with you, I'll put it up on the screen. It's a general description of the program. We have this is, we're not allowed to put anything on the web just yet because of, again, what ATS is telling us they would like from us. So I've put together at least a general description. It describes the tracks, the approach that we're taking, the things that we think are unique about Multnomah and our particular approach. We have, in general, a description of what the schedule would look like over the 3 years of seminars, and then you have 3 years to complete your project, to your final project. I do have a draft of the classes and general curriculum for Paul for his track, and for Rick and his track in mission leadership, Paul's with for Global Theology of Culture. And I also have one for worship, which Dr. Redmond is leading. So if there's a particular track that you're interested in, please contact me and I can get that for you. It details in part maybe even some of the guest instructors that are possible. And I sort of have a book list for some of the tracks, but those are a work in progress right now. But those also can be made available if you're really interested. So again, let me know. From a practical perspective, what is the work of the program for the DMin candidate, and what kind of time commitment are we talking about? That is a great question. If you look at the screen right in front of you, we have, I guess, if you will, the expectation of time, work that will take. So each credit hour will probably involve anywhere from 750 to 1,000 pages of reading, 12 to 15 pages written work. So you can basically do the math from there. That's obviously going to vary according to how fast some people read and how fast people get their papers done. One of the things that we're doing, and in fact you'll notice it, one of the first classes you're going to take is an orientation And that orientation is going to deal specifically with writing. What we recognize is that people might be a little bit rusty, and so we want to get them geared to thinking about how to write early on. You're going to be writing for each course, each seminar. You're going to be writing a lot for your final project / dissertation. So we're going to get you thinking about that early on. Again, the amount of time, the time commitment, that will probably vary from person to person. My plan later on is to actually put together perhaps just a sample of what the work might look like, and it will detail perhaps a little more specifically the amount of time it could take a person. I'd like to get down to maybe even just the nitty-gritty. If you're looking at it and if you're disciplined, what would a 40-hour work week look like for you? And if you were taking classes, how much time would that add to your weekly work? To be honest, I haven't found many people. None of my classmates did that. We all crammed maybe a month or two before classes started. So I'll paint a picture of what might be the ideal world, what's idyllic, and then I'll also put something together more realistic. What would maybe a month or 2 months look like right before classes start? And that's just that's being honest. I found we all cram. I did it. My classmates did it. But that's a great question. I appreciate that, Mark. Thank you for asking it. Does that answer it, hopefully? Maybe it gives rise to other questions. Feel free to ask. As you can also see, costs, the estimated cost of doing the program for maybe the 4 years, if you will, when the cost would be incurred based on projected dollars. We're looking at $500 per credit hour. It's not adjusting for inflation. In conversations we're having with the administration, we're looking at the costs might jump up, say, 5% every year. So tack on 5% for the $500 in year 2, add 5% more for year 3, 5% more year 4. You can do the math on that, but that's just a general estimate of cost. Looking at, say, overall cost in, say, 2013 dollars, $16,000 for the life of the program. Are there any other questions out there? We have a few minutes left. Anything you would like to ask of Paul? You can also reach me at my email address, which is dchin, that's 2 N's, at multnomah.edu.
Derek, do you have any other questions for me that you think would be of benefit to them?
Well, who would you envision taking this particular track? I mean, who do you think that this track would appeal to? If you were to describe maybe a ministry role that a person has right now, what type of person do you think would be joining your track?
I think those pastors and practitioners who have more of that missional outpost orientation, that they're supposed to be leaders in the community, who are engaging diverse communities, people who might be outside of the dominant subculture of the local church from which they come. So they're engaging diverse communities. They're outside the domain of the church doors. So it could be a missional pastor for a church, whether the person is in the local context or overseas, because they're working with diverse populations. And I really believe if you're going to engage diverse populations, this track is well suited for that. So when I'm engaging Buddhists, or when I'm engaging people of diverse ethnicity outside of my own subculture, the kind of skill set that we're talking about comes into play, because it requires a lot of cultural intelligence that I don't necessarily have the savvy for, just in terms of my own particular upbringing, because I've been isolated in many respects from this. So I think missional pastors, those who are involved in NGO kind of work, non-government organizations where they're addressing communities under duress, and how to engage in ways that are very thoughtful and missional with the kind of cultural intelligence that's required. So those engaged in apologetics and evangelistic ministries here abroad as well. These various works would be some of the group's enterprises. And those who maybe pastors, even senior pastors, who are doing a distinctive work outside of the context of their dominant church subculture, a distinctive enterprise where it really requires a new kind of engagement, going to engage diverse populations. This track, I think, would be very beneficial to them.
Great. Well, I don't see any other questions coming up. It seems like we've either answered the questions or people have fallen asleep. So with that, I guess we'll wrap up. I can send some of the stuff that you see up on the screen. If you want, I can send it to you. There are hard copies of it. And yeah, we thank you very much for joining us and appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
That is a gift for us, and we recognize it and appreciate it. Thank you.
And I would just say, too, in closing, Derek, that we really do hope that you'll join us and be a part of this community. It's not simply about my offering you a certain template or education, but we really, in this collaborative enterprise, look to you as those who would shape our thinking as well. So look at this as a collaborative enterprise of going forward together. That's what excites me the most.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, folks.